Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Hello to anyone who might be joining on the Temple Beth Am podcast whenever you are listening to us. Let me begin with two announcements. One, we're going to end about 5 minutes early today because I have to rush to an appointment I can't be late for. And next week, I'll put this in the WhatsApp chat. Class is only online. We're having class, but only online. So don't come to Whiteman unless you want mediocre coffee for free. Only online next week. And that will be, it'll be like the good old times. Okay, we are in the stretch of three, maybe four, I think three verses where Rashi is quiet, and as has been my pattern more recently. When Rashi's quiet, I try to see if there's one other commentary who we can study each of those verses, because somebody always says something. We read the verse last week, but we didn't read the commentary that I was going to bring. So it's chapter 9 of Shemot, verse 5. Let me read the verse. And then we'll, I think the commentary I'm bringing in this verse is the Bechor Shor, another early French commentator. Chapter 9, verse 5. And we're talking about the introduction of the plague of Dever, which is 5. Dams Ferdea Kinim Dever. Yeah, 5. No. Dams Ferdea Kinim Arov Dever. Yeah, 5. Vayasem Adonai Moed. God will appoint a time, Lemor saying, Machar, tomorrow, Yaseh Adonai Hadavar Hazeh Ba'aretz. God will do this thing in the land. And we talked about last week how Davar and Dever are playing a game with each other linguistically. So this is the, and we also discussed, we don't have to go back into it, that it's hard to know which level of quotation mark we are in here. Is this all in the thing that God is telling Moses he wants Moses to say to Pharaoh, or did that quotation mark end and we're now kind of in Moses's own interpolation or interpretation of what God wants to say? But we know the basic information that tomorrow God is going to set an appointed time when this thing is going to happen. Okay. On that verse, because we actually looked at the verse last week, I want to share the screen. Once I share it, Elon, you may have to click something else again. Let's see. Yeah, if you can just reduce that. Bechor Shor, early French commentator. I think he's about 100 or 200 years later than Rashi. I think he's maybe 13th century. Don't remember 100%. Look what he says. And we, somebody that we were listening to last week kind of hinted at this a little bit in terms of where we are. I think Barry was talking about it, where we are are we at an inflection point or some kind of peak in the array of plagues? Look what the Bechor Shor says. Vayasem Adonai Moed Lemor. That's the verse. God is going to place an appointment tomorrow. Hu Amar, God said, Shetasu Chag, that you should make a holiday, Hayantif, 2 days. It's out of Umoed, Uzvicha, and a sacrifice, Ba'aretz in the land, Lemachar, Yehi Moed, Zvichat Tovatam. And the appointed time will be the sacrifice, the slaughter of the thing that they consider to be sacred, right? Remember we talked about how Toeva can both mean an awful thing you do, or something you do which is sacred to someone else, and therefore it seems like an abomination to them. Sheyamutu badever, because there's going to be a slaughter in that many of their animals, which were sacred to them, are going to die in the pestilence, badever. Misham be'elach, from this point forward, lo haita maka, there was not a single plague, shalo laka, that did not smite, toavatam, the things that are sacred to them. And look how we read this through. Ki haya hashchin, because the boils that are going to come at some point, maybe even this week, meaning we might get to this week, ba'adam u'avehema, the boils came down, and we learned directly, came down both on the human beings and on the animals. V'habarad, and the hail, harag behemot, also killed animals. V'ha'arbeh, the locusts, achal kol yerek esev, ate up all of the vegetation, which is ma'achal habehemot, which is the foodstuffs for the animals. Uveshlosha yimei achoshech, and in the 3 days of darkness, this is number 9 already, lo nitan teven lebehemot. This is a bit of a stretch. It was so dark they couldn't feed their animals. By the way, that's a very resonant and poignant way of talking about how something that seems to be impacting just the human population is impacting the animal population. Think about the cattle and the sheep and all of those kibbutzim and Oteb Aza who all of a sudden were evacuated from their workers. And guess what? Those cows were still hungry, right? And that's why people have been trickling in to help keep agriculture going, right? So it was a plague as a word that impacted the animals as well. Lonitan tevin lebehemot umakat bechorot, and the slaying of the firstborn haita af babehemot also impacted the animals. We'll see when we get there. The gam siva hakadosh, and also the Holy One commanded lakacha, to take set lavayat, each person a goat. This is for the night of Exodus. Selavet avot, each ancestral house gets a goat. Le'enehem, in front of the eyes of the Egyptians. V'latet damo al hamashkof, and to place its blood on the lintel. V'hamuzuzot, on the doorpost. Befar hesya, in public. I searched and I could not find what Hey Gimel Hey stands for in all of the collections of Rashi Teva. I'm not sure what that means at the end of his comment here. So what the Bechor Shor is saying is we've hit a point where there's some kind of an intensifying or at least changing of the plagues that is not just impacting Egyptian civilians, it's also impacting the Egyptian animals. And that's going to go all the way through the end of the plague and the night of Exodus. Now, what he doesn't say, because he's a commentator, is not a sermon giver, right? In some ways, he's as terse as Rashi. He's pointing out something interesting in the text. He doesn't say the therefore, and so it teaches us that, and what we learn from is, and that's up for us to discuss if we want to, but he's pointing out a pattern that is not, it's not an obligatory pattern. One does not have to read it this patternized, but he's choosing to, and so I leave it for everyone on the table if you want. What do you take from this? Assuming you buy the Bechor Shor's pattern, what do you take from this? What would be the significance of that? Barry, let's give Barry a microphone. Let's take it off the stand.
Up until now, it's been bad for the Egyptians. They suffered this, they suffered this. Okay, they put up with that stuff, but now it's an abomination of their holy animals,
right?
And so that's beyond what they can handle. That's beyond.
Mm-hmm. As if to say that a population can potentially handle their own deprivation, but not something that is not a degradation of something sacred to them. Tova?
I would just elaborate on that going to the destruction of something that's sacred in an even greater way undermines their sense of ma'at, of order, of the order of creation being undone, which was the central tenet of Egypt for most of its history.
What was the word used? Ma'at.
It's usually translated as truth, but what it really means is the order that was established out of chaos at the beginning of creation, the way that things should be. And part of that...
It sounds so Jewish.
There's an element, I mean, the creation story has a lot of elements in common, but for instance, the idea that the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, should be one country, that's part of Ma'at. That's part of the intended structure of creation. And so the entire thing is like undoing an attack on Ma'at, but with the addition of the attack on the sacred, it broadens that.
So it's not just human suffering. Yeah. It's human suffering and a breakdown of all the truths of the society.
Right, exactly.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Barry?
Sort of on the same thing that it's sort of like a military or a fighting strategy. First you hit the body, and then you destroy the spirit. Mm-hmm. So when you've done the body and then you hit the spirit, then your enemy is weakened.
Those are apt comments. I'm in the middle of a fascinating and illuminating and troubling podcast episode with Sam Harris and Yuval Noah Harari. I think two of the smartest human beings alive. And I think, as I've said before, many sermons, I like exposing myself to thinkers I don't necessarily agree with, but who I know are intelligent and are going to approach something soberly. And listen to the two of these brilliant minds speak about the current situation in the Middle East. And Yuval Noah Harari is Israeli, but no fan of the Israeli government. He is an extreme left-wing voice in Israel and a brilliant thinker about the human condition. The two of them going back and forth is fascinating. And Sam Harris made a point. I'm gonna ruin it. So listen to it. But something like, what does it say about a society if it's a greater insult to the society for you to do something to their God and their buildings than to their own people? And he was making that claim about jihadi Islam. It's like, Israel would never do this. But can you imagine if Israel said to Hamas, release all our prisoners today, or we will destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque? That would cause World War III. The destruction of that building would be considered more of an offense to radical Islam than the destruction of the next 10,000 Palestinian lives, right? And what does it say if your sanctities, your sacred images of your divinity and your building is more of an offense than destruction of your people? So it's an interesting thing to linger on when we take your comments on the Bechor Shor's comment that somehow we've caused your people to suffer, but now we're causing your gods to suffer, or the things representing your order to suffer, as if that's an intensification, what does that say about what your society believes in? So we're the episode. Sue, microphone. And then, sorry, was your hand up, Larry? Okay.
Well, along those lines, though, I mean, we're many thousands of years later commemorating the destruction of the temple. We're not that's the nature of humanity, I think, in some ways, that those symbols are, they're bigger than the people in some way.
I'll yes and you, right? We're commemorating it, but we're not destroying other civilizations as well, right? Yeah. And the reason why we're commemorating it is because it ended Jewish presence and sovereignty and worship in Jerusalem. It wasn't just that it was a building, it destroyed the civilization, right? If, God forbid, the Israeli government, which it would never do, destroyed the Al-Aqsa Mosque tomorrow, there's nothing about the world of Islam that would be different. But when the Romans destroyed the temple, that was the end of Jewish civilization at the time. Larry and then Rosemary.
Wow, I'm going to take a left turn and respond to Sue and to you.
And I do see your hand, Rick.
So some of us commemorate and celebrate because it wasn't the end of Jewish civilization. It was the beginning of Judaism. And if it hadn't been for that, so in some sense, I've never seen this actually written. We'd be stuck. Right, we'd be stuck. We should be celebrating it. It was a really good thing. We can have that conversation sometime, another time.
Or at least celebrating what Judaism did in the aftermath of it.
Yeah, but it liberated us from all the things you talked about.
Yeah.
And even though there are some who want to bring us back, but that's a different discussion.
Yeah.
A couple of trivial comments. First of all, it's pretty clear that this is the end of the double quotes, and JPS actually has double quotes at the end of this verse.
Previous verse?
No, from verse 1.
But where does JPS put the double quote?
At the end of 5.
End of 5. Got it. Okay.
All of that is God speaking.
Okay.
And just briefly looking ahead, we skip the whole part where Moses actually tells Pharaoh, but we'll get to that later on. I think if I'm reading the Bechor Shor correctly, he doesn't mention Choshech. So somehow Choshech. Does he? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Line 5. The end of line 4. Uveshlosha yemei hachoshech lo nitan teven lebehema.
Okay. So now I get
it. The darkness, they couldn't feed their animals.
Okay, so then it affected them all. And it's interesting that I kind of understand how he gets to this from the Moed issue, but in a way it's rather sad that the animals had to suffer.
Yeah.
So you're distinguishing between the people suffering because of their government, because of Pharaoh, versus the innocent animals who are suffering. He doesn't go in that direction, but I wonder if any other commentators actually have.
Yeah. I mean, it's an apt question. You're basically saying, we asked a question before, what does it say about your society if moving in this direction is worse than you killing your people? What does it say about your God who's willing to take down the animals? From some of I saw some of the horrific video footage from October 7th. There are places on the internet where if you are willing to expose yourself to it, you can see it, and you sort of should and shouldn't. I don't know what the following sentence means. I'll just say it. There are things that I saw that I'll never be able to unsee, and it ruined nights of sleep. And some of the most indelible images are of the dogs being shot. I don't know why. Maybe because I'm a dog lover. I'm also a human being lover. But there was something about them coming in, and you see a dog, not a dog attacking them, just running across one of the fields of Kibbutz Nirim or Neros, and then the dog being shot down. There was something about that I don't know, it expanded the category of barbarism.
Because it's so gratuitous.
Gratuitous, yeah. So one could take the Bechor Shor's comment and say, like, gosh, I feel even yuckier about how to interact with the God of this section. Rosemary, and then I see Rick, and then I see Joanna.
I think all the things that happened one after the other, it was just preparing and attacking the first things they believe. Like if there were insects, then we know in Egyptians they had insects that they were important for them. And then it went bigger and bigger to enemy lives that's small. But all the animals became small and they went bigger because the biggest one was the firstborn.
Fascinating.
So it was just preparing the road to arrive to the big world.
Fascinating.
But on the other side, what you were talking about, Jerusalem, Alaska, this is it. I always think like the story of a rich person's a child which kills somebody, and the poor one, he does the same thing. The rich one has many attorneys that finally gets out, but the poor one will go to the prison. There are many things that some countries they do and nobody talks about. And if Israel just have one thing, then everybody talks about.
Yeah.
Right now, at this moment, there are 125,000 people out of Artsakh, Arabah. They are nowhere to go. There's no place to go. Nobody is helping them, and nobody is writing about them. And there is a monastery that I have visited. It was built on 1200. They have cut the top of it, which was rounded, which was with cross, and the other one was bell room. And they cut all of them. They're making it mosque. Yeah. And I actually wrote, I said, Christianity and Judaism was accepted in Quran. How come they are destroying it? And how come God will go there and listen to their prayers where it was before prayed for another person?
Yes.
So they are doing, and nobody is writing that. It was 700 years before the establishment of Azerbaijan that existed, that church.
Yeah.
And they have done this many places. And the last thing is Turkey has the guts all the time, Erdogan going saying genocide. That was the word for Armenian genocide. He's using for Israel. Israel is not doing genocide, but Armenians were doing.
Poignant. And also let's go jump back in the text. Rick and then Joanna.
Hi. I was just going to, I'm realizing now that it's ahead of the game because we only got up to 5, but when you were talking about Mott, thank our lucky stars again for Tova knowing all about Egypt. But you have mates coming up and Lamut and Yamut. So, and then Yichbad, the heaviness of Pharaoh's heart again. So it's always, to me, I always hear the anti-Egyptian religion coming through. They didn't have to, the text doesn't have to say there's lo meit echad twice, there's lo meit. They could have said there's peace there. They didn't have to say there's no death, but I think the meit is that there's no more order. The ma'at, the order that Tova was talking about, is gone. So
thank you, Rick.
Thanks.
Before Joanna speaks, just because some people joined the Zoom after I made these announcements, 2 announcements. We're going to end class 5 minutes early today because I have to be somewhere and can't be late. And next week, class only on Zoom next week. Joanna.
Apologies, my video seems to have gone haywire, but it's interesting in light of this conversation about, the value and sanctity of life versus the value and sanctity of, your God and the places that represent that, to think about why in particular we lost the second temple. Because
wait, Joanna, say that sentence again, because we lost the audio too.
Okay, let's try again. It's interesting to think about why in particular, in context of this discussion, why we lost the second temple. We lost the second temple. We lost our spiritual place because we were not valuing human life.
Yeah, right. So at least the rabbinic gloss on the history around the law of the destruction of the second temple is because of sinat chinam, that by not valuing human life and human feelings, we lost our sacred home. Yeah, which is different than the rabbinic explanation for why the first temple was destroyed, which was for 3 sins: for shvichut damim, murder; for gilui arayot, sexual depravity; and avodah zarah, for idolatry. Thank you, Joanna. Okay, let's now read verse 6, and then we'll be looking at a different commentator on that verse. Let's see. Rebecca, do you want to read verse 6?
Okay. Vayas Adonai et hadavar hazeh mimacharat v'yamat kol miknei Mitzrayim umimiknei b'nei Yisrael lo meit echad.
Okay.
And God did this thing on the from tomorrow, on the morrow.
I think on the morrow is the perfect English for that. Yeah, the next day.
The next day, and died all the cattle of Egypt, but the cattle of the children of Israel, not one died.
Good. All right. So verse 6 jumps to the deed, right? We don't have the interaction between Moses and Pharaoh. God does the davar of the dever, as it were, the thing of the pestilence on the next day. All of the cattle of Egypt died, and of the miknei bnei Israel, of the cattle of the children of Israel, not a single one died. Okay. Rashi's quiet in the verse. What people want to ask or say about the verse? Joanna, your hand is up again. Or is that still?
Oh, sorry. From before.
Okay. Comments or questions on the verse? Marshall.
Well, just the word mikneh interests me because the translations I've seen is livestock, not cattle. So all their livestock, there's mikneh tzon, mikneh behema.
Good. So if it's all of their livestock, not just their cattle, then what? What does that? I don't know. Where does that leave us if we're being told that all of their livestock are dead?
That they're hungry.
That they're hungry, that there's no milk. The reason I lead the witness in that regard is because the commentary we're going to look at is picking up on the fact that the verse does seem to say that all of their livestock are dead. Okay. Wait, microphone.
That reduces the idea that only their spiritual essence has been attacked. This is their food stuff has been attacked.
Yes.
It's a human suffering.
Anything else on the verse itself? Questions you want to ask or comments that you want to make on the verse before we look at the commentator? Okay. Let me put the next commentary on the page. This is the Ibn Ezra on this verse. Okay. Yes, Sue, you need a microphone?
I just want to say that the mimacharat, that's fast. This is like It seems like, why is that there? So like, okay, tomorrow at the very next day, it was like, this wasn't something that they had any processing time to respond to. This was, completely befell them.
Yeah. And if we remind ourselves that they were told it was going to happen tomorrow in verse 5, and it indeed happened tomorrow. And it's not the first time where we see the story not just imposing the heaviness of the plague, but going back to Ma'at, God's being able to control time too. Like I will tell you, it's happening tomorrow at 9:50 a.m. and that's exactly when it's going to happen. And you can even ask me, when do you want? Is it the frogs to leave? Right? Was that it? And they left at that exact time, right? So that is both sort of a show of compassion, and you get to choose when it's happening, but it's also a way of saying all of the things that you think that you and your gods are in control of, I am. Right? Look what Ibn Ezra says on Vayas Adonai, remembering the comment that Marshall said. The explanation of the phrase that all of the livestock of Egypt died is rubo, most of them. So Ibn Ezra says, it says all of them. Sometimes all doesn't mean all, right? Like all the time does not mean all the time in English, right? It means most. How do we know this? Kihine kativ, because it is written when, ahead in verse 19. So everyone look at verse 19 in your own books. This is regarding the plague of hail. In verse 19, we're told, Vata shlach ha'ez et miknecha, go dispatch and bring in your livestock. Kol ha'shelacha basadeh, and all of the things that you have in the field. Kol ha'dam hayu, etc. Because the hail is going to come down. So Ibn Ezra says, if in 19 they still had livestock that would have been exposed to the hail, it must mean that all the livestock was not possibly killed in this verse. Okay, and I keep Joel. This is Murphy's Law. Wherever the microphone is, it's as far away as possible from the person who wants to speak next. Yes.
Well, if you accept Marshall's comment that miknem means livestock, it doesn't mean every member. It just means all. It affected all the range of livestock.
Yeah. So right, I think that could be a commentary on that could be defending Ibn Ezra. That's how it could be kol and rov, like all species suffered, but not every individual living being. Look at the second line up here. V'kacha timtza bebarad, and we find the same when the plague of hail is introduced, where it says v'et kol esev hasadeh. It's going to say that the hail is going to destroy all of the vegetation. The ha'ed, but the witness to the fact that was not the case is that when we get to arbeh, locusts, what are locusts eating? V'achal et yeter ha'pleita. They ate the remaining vegetation, which means that whatever the barad, the hail destroyed, it wasn't all of it. So at the core, Ibn Ezra is a grammarian, right? He's much less of a midrashic sermonizer than a grammarian, and he wants you to know, yes, it says kol. Sometimes we say kol, we mean rov. Sometimes we say all, and we mean most. And he shows you two other examples where that's the case. Okay, a lot of hands. I see Larry, Sitova, and then Rick's hand was up also.
The thing that strikes me about the verse is, I already mentioned, Moses doesn't tell Pharaoh, but neither does Moses or Aaron use the rod to bring it out to bring the plague on. Is this is the first plague, I think, that it
just happens.
It just happens.
I have to check to see if that's the case, but it might be. Is the previous one also? Was Arov done with the use of hands? I'm not sure, because if you look at chapter 8, verse 20, it's right after God promises what's going to happen to all this Arov. It just appears. Vayas Adonai Kain vayavo Arov kabed beit Faro. I don't think there's Moses and Aaron initiating that either.
Right. Okay.
Tova.
I guess another way, or that I'm thinking of it, is that it's saying that of all those Kol, all those that died, they were all Egyptian. And of all those that survived, they were all Hebrews.
Okay, good. So that's another way of making sense of this notion of Kol. Rick, one second, Barry. Rick, and then Stevie.
Hi. Just to underline the attack on the Egyptian religion, if their rams are dying, then they can't worship the ram god. If the cow god is dying, they can't worship the cow god. So besides their diet, not being able to eat them, if they ate them, I don't know about that, but it's interfering with their supplication to their gods. Hey, help us against this Israel god. And they can't do that because their animals are gone. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Stevie and then Barry.
Just to add a bit to Ibn Ezra, that when we get to the final plague, in addition to saying that every firstborn died, it also adds the detail that in no house was there not a death. So the idea that you would need that extra phrase implies that saying all doesn't necessarily mean all until you say, not a single escaped.
Very good. And if everyone wants, we can actually look at that. Let's see, because that's interesting contrast. That is going to be, whoever can find the verse first. Maybe it's not worth looking for it. But yes, what Stevie said, that there's almost like a need to explain the notion that all the firstborn died by a second phrase saying there wasn't one house in which it didn't die. So it's only not redundant if sometimes the word all doesn't mean all. Good. Barry?
So going along with what Tova had just pointed out, his kinu was saying that v'yamat kol miknei Mitzrayim. It's a v'yein lomer shechol miknei Mitzrayim made, and not all of them died. Shacharei ketiv. It's trying to say that miknei ben Israel lo made echad. Not one of the Israelites died.
Whom are you reading there? Chizkuni. Correct, right. So Chizkuni takes the Tova way of explaining the Kol rather than the Ibn Ezra way. Great, thank you for that. Okay, anyone else on the verse? Rosemary?
Just for the timing that you were saying, I think last time when we discussed, he told Moses, it was like it already happened. Maybe that's why it just happened the next day, tomorrow. Because before, when he announced, he said, we discussed that. Why did he say like it happened already, not will happen?
Got it. Okay, let's go. Joel?
I just want to connect the dots. So going back, we had the turning the water into blood that caused the frogs to jump out and to infest. And then they were in a heap and they caused all these gnats to come and eat the dead bodies. And then there's the dever, which I said was probably mites or some.
You mean the arov?
The arov, which ate the gnats. And now I looked up and there's mites can cause cattle disease. So far it works.
There's a natural progression.
Natural progression. I don't know how
right.
we're gonna get
and it's sort of
it's
chad gad ya'ish also a little bit. Yeah. Okay, good. Let's read verse 7 and then I'll share with you the commentary I brought for verse 7. Who have not heard from? I've heard from everyone. Elon, let's read verse 7, please. Let's give Elon a microphone, please.
וישלח פרעה והנה לא מת ממקנה ישראל עד אחד ויכבד לב פרעה ולא שלח את העם. And Pharaoh sent and he saw that they didn't die from the livestock of Israel, not one. V'chabed and Pharaoh's hardened, and he didn't send out the people.
Great. Okay. So, as you're translating that in your head, everybody, you might be like wishing there was a phrase after Vayishlach Paro, because it kind of hangs there. And Pharaoh sent. Pharaoh sent what? Right? And some of the translations even fill it in. He sent a messenger, or he sent to inquire, or he sent, how does JPS do it? Yeah, Everett Fox says Pharaoh sent, and he puts in brackets to inquire, because normally sending means an object, right? So the sending here seems to be to go see what happened out there the day after the Dever. And Hine, behold, whomever he sent to give him this information. By the way, that is reminiscent of the sending that takes place at the end of the flood, because Noah sends the birds out to scout, to see how the damage is. So it's the same notion. Not what basically what we were told in verse 6, we're now told Pharaoh learns in verse 7. We already know this information because it says in verse 6. But now we're told that Pharaoh is realizing that not a single one of the flock of Israel died. His heart was hardened, and he didn't send the people. Okay. Thoughts, comments before we read Sforno on this verse? Sforno, Italian. We're going to go Italian. Rick.
Hi. Just on what you said, when the Israelites are leaving, Pharaoh sends out a messenger. What are they doing? How come they're not coming back? And he's told that they're not coming back, that they did their thing and they're still going. So it's like he has messengers going back to find out what's happening with the Israelites.
Yeah. Anything that this verse makes you question or wonder about? Anything in the plot or the language? Tova? Oh, the microphone is right there. Look at that. Yeah. Violating our principle.
Well, the thing that struck me when we first read it, and I've sort of been pondering about it, is that he sends out and gets the information that presumably the Egyptian cattle have died, or many of them have died, but Israel's haven't. And the result is that his heart is hardened and he doesn't let them go, which seems contrary to,
Perfect. Right. So in successive verses, Tova has been the Chizkuni, and now Tova is the Sforno, right? The plot, it's subtle, but the plot line is interesting. We've had the pattern that first Pharaoh sees the impact of what God can do, and momentarily gets nervous and considers sending, and then ultimately says, you know what, even though I recognize that God is powerful, I'm still going to harden my heart. Here, the verse seems to be saying, Pharaoh sends the information, gets information. The information reinforces that he's powerless. And in reaction to that, he hardens his heart. It should be in reaction to that, he softened his heart, and then he got stubborn again, right? There seems to be something incongruous about that. Marshall, then Sue, and then we'll look at Sforno. But we already have read Sforno.
So on the verse itself, we have the word hine, which Robert Alter is looking at look, right? And then we have the word ad echad, which Ibn Ezra in the long version makes a comment on, where he says the word ad means afilu. Because when I read the verse, I said the word ad is not, it means up until odd. It is.
Thank you, Joel.
Very, very good. Because I was thinking the word should have been af.
Yeah.
Maybe in my text, it should have been af, but at least Ibn Ezra, the long version, says it's afilu. And maybe you can explain. I guess there are two versions of Ibn Ezra. A long version and a short version?
There are two. They're referred to as the long version, the short version, but it's not necessarily the case that the long version always has longer comments than the short version. And I once was able to answer that question more intelligently as to why they're referred to as the long and the short. Because sometimes on the page, the short version, the Ibn Ezra HaKatzar, the short Ibn Ezra is a longer comment than Ibn Ezra HaAroch, but I forgot why it got that moniker. You reminded me of something else. Oh, I had a class at JTS with Professor Yochanan Mufs of blessed memory, who in his prime was just considered an unbelievably radiant and illuminating Bible professor. Marlon, my mother-in-law, still talks about what it was like for her to study with him in the 1960s. By the time I was studying with him in the late 90s, he was very, very, this is actually ironic when I think about it, very diminished by Parkinson's. And he had the kind of Parkinson's where his mind was fully intact, but his body would freeze. And then he'd be sort of momentarily paralyzed. So we were meeting in his office, and he would be going for 10 minutes, and then he would stop, almost like that, like awakenings, and he could be still for 20 minutes. And we would just sit there politely for 20 minutes, and then he'd awaken. And it was clear when he awakened that he was there the whole time, because he came back right to the same sentence. So it's actually horrific to think about someone that alert.
He knew about the boss. He knew he was.
Yeah, but he couldn't stop it. Why do I mention it? He was a incredibly astute Bible scholar, and one of the things he loved most to do was explore the possible places where biblical texts have been either unintentionally or intentionally emended, where if it was this letter, now this letter, in 9th century BCE, it got changed and it got codified, and it was a class on Isaiah, so all in the chapters of Isaiah. But I can imagine Yochanan Mufs wondering in this verse, maybe not only that ad sometimes mean off, maybe the word was off, right, and it turned into odd. We don't know, right? But that's not a hard mistake to make by a handwritten scribe in the hills of Judea in the year 741 BCE. Right. So, because the odd, you're right, is odd. The odd is odd there. I just stole Joel's joke by accident. Okay, let's read Sforno, right? Anyway, Sue, was it? And Elon, was your hand up also? Oh,
I'm just thinking about this. After the disaster, and he went out and he saw the Israelites. That none of them got damaged, and that hardened his heart. That's what we were talking about. And everything I read and everything I think about, everything that happens in the world, I think about the war in Israel. It's everything gets framed in that for me. And I'm just thinking about that. It's like he went out and he saw that the Israelite, nothing was affected, and he got mad as hell. He's like, I'm mad as hell. I'm not doing anything. Yeah. It's over. And so then you watch the escalation of hostility and anger, and then where does it end? How does it end? How does that the kind of reactive thing, how would it be softened from that? Yeah. How could he go out and see that they're okay, and then he come back and go, okay, all right then.
Right. If that evidence hardens Pharaoh's heart rather than softens Pharaoh's heart, then there's no convincing him, right? And you're right. And Sam Harris makes a similar point in that same podcast about even in the awfulness of war, there are certain moral and logical arguments that people hold that to suggest how and in what way the enemy will be subdued. And if you're dealing with an enemy that forget about doesn't even respond to the logic of when an enemy should understand that they're being defeated, then it's hard to win any war, right? Like, even we can debate ad infinitum whether the decision to bomb Hiroshima was a good decision or a bad decision, saved lives or killed lives. But ultimately, Japan showed itself to be logical. Once they realized the emperor did, right? The emperor did. That there was no way to imagine a situation in which they wouldn't be defeated. There was a surrender. But what do you do when you're dealing with an enemy like Pharaoh, whose response to being overpowered is to double down, right? Tova.
This is more or less following on what we've been saying, but I did want to point out, as I've mentioned before, how interesting it is that they use the word kaved, which we're translating as hardening, but also can mean weighty.
Yeah.
That you could also read this as going on the same premise that he was angered by it, but that rather than that his heart was weighted down, and he then didn't let them go, but rather that his heart was weighted down in a sense because he didn't let them go. That it's a statement of he adds to the sinfulness, the weightiness of his own heart because he makes that decision.
Nice. Thank you.
Interesting. My translation on this it remained hard. His heart remained hard. In other words, this is not his choice.
Yeah, and we discussed that a few times. That is each time this phrase is used a description of the type of person he was, which is explaining the behavior, or a description of something happening to him in that moment, right? And we can't resolve that conundrum, but it's an interesting thing to think about each time.
It's God's cause.
Look at, I'm going to share the screen. We'll see what Sforno has to say about this. We've already kind of discussed the topic. Sforno, Italian commentator, 15th, 16th century. V'hinei lo meit mimiknei Yisrael ad ed echad vayichbad lev paro. Af al pi shehaya ze pele muvuar. Even though this is an obvious miracle that you can't claim once it's been told to you that your cattle died and not one in Israel did, you can't claim that that's a natural phenomenon. Bilti mityaches. It doesn't make any sense according to rational law. B'shum panim, in any situation, zulati le'el yibarach, aside from through the God, may God be blessed, ki ein misha yuchal lahavtiach b'chayim zulato, because there's no other power that could have promised life, meaning promised that the livestock would stay alive aside from him. And despite that, or in reaction to that, that's when you harden your heart. That's not just an evil person, that's a psychopath, right? If Sforno spoke 21st century English, that's what you would say. That's psychopathic. That's just not even listening to the data that's put in front of you. So he's pointing out that this is a pattern change. We've seen two steps be turned into one. The two steps have been Pharaoh begrudgingly saying, "Oh my God, this is a really significant God. Maybe I should think about what I'm doing." No, I can't. Here, he jumps straight to, because I'm seeing how powerful God is and how powerful as I am, therefore I'm hardening my heart. Right? So Sforno, again, what Tova said before is basically the point that Sforno is making.
What is zulati, zulato? What is that word?
Other than. Zulat means only or unique. So zulati le'el yibarach, aside from. Yeah. I forgot why that word means that. I don't really think that it appears in modern Hebrew, right? Zulat. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it might.
Like what in sort of poetic romantic Hebrew, you can refer to your beloved as your zulat, like the only one for you, right? The other, yeah. But I forgot again at the core etymologically why it means that. Okay, those are our 3 non-Rashi verses. We got through all of them. I can't believe it. And even on a shortened class. Stevie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just seeing Chizkuni makes an interesting comment on Vechaved Levav.
Can you speak a little bit louder, Stevie?
Sorry. Chizkuni makes an interesting comment. Right, that Pharaoh, his heart was hardened because he did not need to ask Moses to pray for him, because what's dead is dead and what's alive is alive. That like the nature of the plague was such that there wasn't any ongoing effect. So that's what made him harden his heart, is there was no need to ask Moses, to beg Moses for something to end or for prayer.
Good. And while you were talking, I shared it on the screen. So it's the second commentary on the right. Chizkuni is responding to the same quote unquote problem in the verse and just explain it a different way. Right? There was another reason why we didn't have the step of asking Moses to pray, because they're all dead. So but you could also respond back to Chizkuni, isn't God capable of resurrection of the dead? We certainly daven for that all the time. Larry, as you're walking down the street.
Thank you. I just want to refer back to Sforno because I think that actually has insight into human nature. Because how often does rational argument work? And very often, all of us, at least I'll speak for myself, double down when confronted with rationale that suggests that we're wrong.
Yeah.
And that's all. I don't think it's actually changed over time. Yeah. And it continues to this day.
Right. And we all in those moments are convinced that we're rational, right? So that there's something like irrational even about our claims to rationality. Very good. Okay, let's read the next verse. The next verse is the first verse in a while that Rashi says something about. So let's read it. 9:22. We have 3 minutes. Let me read this verse so we can do it quickly, and then we'll start with the Rashi next week. So verse 8. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe v'el Aaron kechu lachem melo chofnechem piach kibshan uzrako Moshe hashamayma leinei Pharaoh. God said to Moses and to Aaron, so pay attention to that. And the next verbs are plural. Kechu, take the two of you. Lachem, take for yourselves. Lachem does not always mean for yourself, right? Lech lecha, we talk about all the time, does not necessarily mean that that Aaron was being told to go for himself. It sometimes it's just a way of just adding to the verb. Take for yourselves melo chofnechem, the fill of your chofen. And you know what a chofen is? This, right? It's actually a biblical measurement, and we have that in the sacrifices as well. Putting your hands together like this is a chofen. So melo chofnechem means filling up both of your hands, plural. So filling up both of your hands, right? Filling it up with what? Piach kibshan, the piach of a kibshan. Anyone know what either word means? What's kibshan? Furnace, okay? Piach is interesting. I want to show you the root in BDB. Where was it? Okay.
Is that like my puach?
Very good, right? It's from the root. There are certain Hebrew roots that the first letter of the root falls out in certain forms. And when the first letter of a root is a nun, it falls out in certain forms, right? Yisa Adonai panav elecha, may God shine God's face or bear God's face upon you, is from the root nasa, but the nun disappears in that form. The root nafach, nun, pei chet, means to blow or to puff. And we have it in the first verses of Breshit, vayipach ba'apav, God blew into his nostrils. The root is nafach, the nun disappears. So if you look at the BDB on the screen, puach is kind of like the gerund or the core root of breathing, blowing from originally napach. And you see the second entry down, it means soot. Now do the work for us. Why would the word soot be from a root that means blowing? Because it's the remnants of a fire that can be blown by the wind. Right? That's what, we don't think of it that way in English, but that's what soot is. Sue?
Is this how in modern Hebrew, charcoals are pachamim? Do we get them from pia? Do we get them from here?
I don't think so. I think pei chet mem.
Mem is a different thing?
a different root than nun pei chet. Could the early be built into the etymology? Sure, but I think they're different roots.
Okay, so I have one more thing.
Yeah.
We've got nun pei, you just said,
right.
And when you're back and pachamim, I'm all in the barbecue now. Like you're nafnafim. You're like blowing the. That's
yes.
You're that's linafnef. You're
waving.
You're waving
right.
You're blowing the pachamim.
So it's more common that if the roots share the first two letters that they're related, than if the first two letters match the second two letters. So it's less common that napach and pacham would be related than napach and nafnef, because the nun pei that begins those roots could be like earlier taxonomy of the root. So just to finish off quickly, so fill your double hands with the soot of the furnace. And now the quotation marks end, because now we're actually being told what happened. Uzurako Moshe, Moses threw it, Moses and not Aaron, even though they're both has to do it. That's going to be important to Rashi's comment. Hashamayma, into the heavens, le'enei Pharaoh, in the eyes of Pharaoh. Okay, so that's what that verse means. We'll pick it up next week. Only on Zoom, everybody. Only on Zoom next week. See y'all soon. Gotta run.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.